It was a warm summer afternoon in June of 1981, and the rolling highways of Idaho stretched endlessly beneath a pale blue sky. Along U.S. Highway 95, a young woman on a bicycle could be seen pedaling steadily, her future seemingly wide open. Her name was Kristin David, just 22 years old, a senior at the University of Idaho, full of ambition, talent, and quiet determination. She was studying journalism and political science, dreaming of a career that would let her voice be heard and her words make an impact. Friends remembered her as bright, driven, and deeply independent, the kind of person who was always moving forward with purpose. That day, Kristin had set out from Moscow, Idaho, on a route that would take her through stretches of open road and quiet farmland toward Lewiston. It was the kind of journey many students in the area made, a simple trip that should have been safe and uneventful. But somewhere along that highway, between the bustle of campus life and the comfort of her destination, Kristin disappeared. She was seen one last time by drivers and passers-by, a young woman pedaling against the summer breeze, before she seemed to vanish into the landscape. For days, there were questions without answers, and the unease of her absence spread across the community. Then, a week later, the quiet waters of the Snake River revealed a discovery that would change everything, drawing investigators into a mystery that still lingers more than 4 decades later. It is a case that continues to haunt the region, not only because of the cruelty of what happened, but because the silence that followed has never been broken. By the summer of 1981, Kristin David had already built a reputation among her classmates and professors as someone destined for something greater than the small college town she called home. At just 22 years old, she was a senior at the University of Idaho, preparing to step into the world with 2 demanding majors, broadcast journalism and political science. Her professors often noted her sharp mind and her ability to approach complex issues with clarity, while her friends described her as ambitious and fiercely independent, the kind of person who could balance a heavy academic workload and still find time to explore new ideas. She was not content to simply go through the motions. Kristin wanted to use her education to carve out a meaningful career, one where her voice would matter. Outside the classroom, her life carried the rhythm of someone active and full of energy. Cycling was not just a hobby, it was part of her daily routine. Whether riding through the quiet streets of Moscow, Idaho, or taking longer trips out into the countryside, Kristin often chose her bike over other forms of transportation. It gave her both freedom and focus, a way to clear her mind while staying connected to the world around her. Friends recalled seeing her glide past on her blue 10-speed bicycle, a familiar figure against the backdrop of rolling fields and university life. By late June of that year, as she prepared for the final chapters of her college experience, Kristin's path seemed as steady and determined as the wheels of the bike she so often relied on until the events of June 26th would forever alter the course of her story. On the morning of June 26, 1981, Kristin set out from Moscow, Idaho, just as she had many times before, balancing her sense of independence with the simple freedom that came from riding her bicycle. She was seen leaving town on her familiar blue 10-speed, a bike that had become almost an extension of herself. Her plan was straightforward: follow U.S. Highway 95 south, a route that would take her through stretches of farmland and rolling hills, all the way to Lewiston. The day carried the kind of weather that made such a journey appealing: clear skies, warm air, and the golden light of early summer spreading across the Palouse. For Kristin, it seemed like a perfect afternoon to be on the road. As the hours passed, witnesses remembered glimpsing a young woman riding steadily along the shoulder of the highway near the small town of Genesee. She appeared focused, her pace consistent, a solitary figure moving against the wide-open backdrop of rural Idaho. Yet not all of the accounts that day were routine. Some drivers reported seeing a brown van slowing near the cyclist, the man inside attempting to speak with her. The image stuck in their minds: a young woman on her bicycle, a vehicle edging too close, a moment that seemed out of place on an otherwise quiet stretch of road. That would be the last confirmed sighting of Kristin David pedaling beneath the bright summer sky, unaware that her journey that day would end in mystery, leaving behind questions that still echo more than 40 years later. 8 days after Kristin was last seen pedaling along Highway 95, the calm of a summer holiday weekend was shattered. On July 4, 1981, while communities across Idaho and Washington prepared for celebrations, a grim discovery was made along the Snake River, just west of Clarkston near Silcott Island. Fishermen and locals noticed something unusual caught along the river's edge: and soon authorities were called to the scene. What they found was devastating. Parts of Kristin David's body had surfaced from the water, wrapped carefully in black plastic garbage bags. The current had carried some pieces downstream, scattering evidence that painted a chilling picture of what had taken place. As investigators sifted through the remains, another unsettling detail emerged. Several body parts were not only concealed in plastic, but also wrapped in sheets of newspaper, specifically editions of the Lewiston Morning Tribune dated April 7th, 17, 19, and 24 of that same year. These dates, months before Kristin's disappearance, hinted at something deliberate, as if someone had gathered and saved those papers for a purpose that would later become clear. This level of preparation suggested that what had happened to Kristin was not the result of a sudden impulse, but a calculated act carried out with chilling forethought. And yet, despite the grim recovery, crucial pieces of the puzzle were missing. Kristin's blue 10-speed bicycle was never found. Neither were her clothes or any of the personal belongings she had taken with her that June morning. The absence of these items left investigators with more questions than answers, stripping away the everyday details that might have pointed to where she had gone or who had crossed her path. By the time the sun set on Independence Day in 1981, the search for Kristin had transformed into a haunting mystery, one that would linger in the hearts of two communities for decades to come. In the days that followed the recovery of Kristin's remains, investigators turned their focus to the few scattered sightings reported along Highway 95 on June 26, 1981. Several witnesses remembered more than just a young woman on a bicycle. They recalled the presence of a man, someone who seemed to appear at just the wrong moment. Described as a white male, roughly 30 years old, he stood about 5'10", weighing close to 180 pounds, with a medium to heavy build. Some thought they noticed facial hair, the kind of feature that lingers in memory even when the rest of the image is uncertain. But it was not only the man that people remembered, it was the vehicle. The reports centered on a brown van that seemed to shadow Kristin on parts of her route. Witnesses described it as well-kept, clean, and carrying yellow license plates, details that stood out on the otherwise quiet highway. The van had distinctive swing-out back doors with windows, and some said there may have been a sliding side door on the passenger's side, a detail that gave investigators hope it could be traced. Despite these descriptions, and despite the sense of unease that witnesses felt when recalling the scene, the trail quickly grew cold. No individual ever came forward to match the profile, and no van with those exact details was ever tied to a suspect. More than 4 decades later, the image remains frozen in time, a young woman cycling beneath a summer sky, and a van pulling close beside her, its driver never identified, its presence left hanging in the shadows of an unanswered case. As investigators searched for answers in the wake of Kristin's death, they began to notice unsettling similarities to other cases that had shaken the Lewiston-Clarkston Valley around the same time. The region, tucked along the border of Idaho and Washington, had already been scarred by unexplained disappearances before the summer of 1981. 2 years earlier, in April of 1979, 12-year-old Kristina White vanished after leaving a friend's house in Lewiston, Washington. Despite exhaustive searches, no trace of her was ever recovered. Then, in September of 1982, the community was struck again. 2 young women, Jackie Brandy Miller, just 18, and her 21-year-old stepsister, Christina Nelson, left home for a short walk in Lewiston but never returned. Their remains would be found years later, hidden deep in the wilderness, their fate still unresolved. On the very same night they disappeared, another person, 35-year-old Stephen Pearsall, also vanished without explanation. He was a friend of the 2 women and a well-known member of the local community. His body has never been found, leaving behind one of the most enduring mysteries in the valley's history. By the mid-1980s, the list of unexplained tragedies in this small corner of the Pacific Northwest had grown too long to ignore. Locals and law enforcement alike began to wonder if a single hand was responsible for the disappearances and deaths that spanned from 1979 to 1982. The theory of a serial offender took hold, fueled by the eerie pattern of young people vanishing or turning up dead under mysterious circumstances. Yet for all the speculation, there has never been a piece of evidence strong enough to tie these cases together in a courtroom. To this day, the connection between Kristin David and the other victims of the Lewis-Clark Valley remains a haunting possibility, one that suggests a larger story, still hidden in silence. From the very beginning, The investigation into Kristin's death was plagued by obstacles that made progress painfully slow. Beyond the remains recovered from the Snake River on July 4, 1981, authorities had little in the way of physical evidence. The black plastic bags offered no unique identifiers, and while the newspaper pages wrapped around portions of her body seemed promising at first, they quickly proved frustrating. Copies of the Lewiston Morning Tribune were widely circulated throughout the region, and the dates April 7, 17, 19, and 24 were months old by the time of the crime. Anyone could have had access to them, leaving investigators unable to narrow the source. Witness accounts, while critical, also carried their own challenges. Drivers along Highway 95 remembered a young woman on a bicycle, and some described a brown van pulling too close, but details varied from person to person. Small differences in recollections whether the man inside had facial hair or whether the van had a sliding door made it difficult to build a profile that would hold up under scrutiny. Without consistency, leads dissolved almost as quickly as they appeared. Modern forensic tools that might have provided breakthroughs, such as DNA testing, were not available in 1981, and to this day, no confirmed DNA evidence from Kristin's case has ever been made public. What might have been a critical turning point in today's era of advanced science simply was not possible at the time. Perhaps most troubling of all was the disappearance of Kristin's personal belongings. Her blue 10-speed bicycle, the very object that carried her along Highway 95 on the day she vanished, was never found. Neither were her clothes or the items she took with her that morning. These missing pieces were not just possessions, they were potential clues, physical traces that could have pointed to her final moments or even to the person responsible. With them gone, investigators were left to work in the shadows, searching for answers in a case where the evidence seemed to vanish as completely as Kristin herself. 4 decades later, Kristin's story refuses to fade into obscurity. In 2021, on the 40th anniversary of her death, the FBI publicly renewed its appeal for information, breathing new life into a case that had long haunted the Lewiston-Clarkston Valley. The agency placed Kristin's file on its official website under the Seeking Information section, a solemn reminder that justice had yet to be served, and that her killer or killers might still be out there. This announcement was not just a bureaucratic gesture. It was a call to the community, urging anyone with even the smallest memory, detail, or suspicion to step forward, because sometimes the tiniest piece of information can break open even the coldest of cases. Media attention soon followed. True crime podcasts, including Crime Junkie, revisited Kristin's disappearance and murder, weaving her story into the broader narrative of unsolved mysteries that continue to grip audiences. National outlets like Fox News also reported on the renewed efforts, pushing Kristin's name back into the headlines after years of silence. Documentaries and independent investigators added their voices too, ensuring that this tragedy was not buried under the weight of time. For law enforcement and for the public, this resurgence carried a sense of urgency. The passing of years had not erased the pain, but it had created distance, witnesses aging, memories fading, records being lost. Investigators stressed that what might seem like an insignificant recollection could, in fact, be the missing link needed to solve the puzzle. After 40 years, the case of Kristin David stood once again in the light, not as a forgotten relic of the past, but as an open wound demanding answers, with hope resting on the possibility that someone, somewhere, still holds the key. And so, Kristin David's story lingers as both a tragedy and a mystery, a reminder of a life full of promise that was stolen far too soon. More than 40 years have passed, yet her case remains open, her name still spoken by investigators, journalists, and ordinary people who believe that the truth is never beyond reach. Somewhere, someone may still hold the missing piece that could bring closure, not only to Kristin's family, but to a community that has carried this shadow for decades. If you found this story compelling and want to see more deep dives into unsolved mysteries, forgotten histories, and stories that deserve to be remembered, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Every like, comment, and share helps keep these stories alive, and together, we can shine a light on the past in the hope of uncovering long-awaited answers.